Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about my first roll of Santa Re 1000, a high-speed black and white film that's a bit better and more interesting than you probably think, which I shot in the Canon F-1. I've already disabled monetization for this video because it's probably going to get demonetized anyway, so let's get into it. This film came out about 4 years ago at this point, and I shot it a year ago, but here we are. Santa Re 1000 is named after the robust analog elf, the character who ran the Santa Film blog, telling us in the world what Santa and his elves were getting up to in their workshop. It's the first film to come from Santa Film, operated through Camera Store, who now currently only sell one film, that being Kodak Aerocolor under the name of Santa Color 100. Santa Re 1000 was apparently based on a then brand new Russian aerial surveillance emulsion, and it was a black and white negative film promising high sharpness, high contrast, and a wide tonal range. The film has a box speed of 1000, though it is technically an ISO 400 film that is being pushed during development, and it's designed for that, just like Ilford's Delta 3200 and Kodak's T-Max P3200, which are ISO 1000 and ISO 800 films respectively. Some people really get their underwear twisted about this whole thing, but if you really start to look into it, most films on the market have a box speed that differs to some degree from their actual densitometric ISO and foot speed. It doesn't actually matter. And bear in mind, these films are designed to be shot and pushed to this speed. You know, it's like a dish that has runny eggs, you know, sunny side up or whatever. Yes, the eggs aren't technically fully cooked, but that's the point. When it first launched, the film was only available in 35mm format, and though it did come out a year later in 120, I was never able to get my hands on some. The 35mm canisters are metal and are hand-loaded with 36 exposures each, and they aren't DX coded, so communicating the frame count and ISO to your camera, if it supports that, isn't possible. The emulsion is coated onto a super thin base that is supposed to enhance clarity and resolution, but does have some drawbacks that we'll see. And the film is designed for development using standard black and white chemicals, yielding negatives that have to be inverted either during the scanning or printing process to yield your final positive images. Like the Seagull IR100 that I spoke about before, I shot this roll of film on a trip to Glasgow to visit my friend Dylan, using the Canon F-1 with mostly the 20-35 ultra-wide zoom, but also, for some of the shots, the 50mm 1.4 when I really needed that extra bit of speed. I use the camera's internal light meter because I don't bring my Sekonic when I'm traveling, and the internal meter on that camera is pretty good. Most of this roll was shot at the Hunterian and Kelvin Grove museums because I needed something to take advantage of the relatively dim light indoors, though I did get a bit of kind of urban and street photography in between when we were traveling about. I actually got 37 frames out of this roll, but that didn't work in my favor, as you'll see later on. I developed the film using D76 1+1 because I didn't have any X-Tol at the time, and I didn't want to use Rodinal because I knew I was pushing and I didn't want to enhance the grain too much in case it just made it a bit too coarse. Then I scanned the film in the usual way, GFX 100S, Pentax 645 120mm f4 macro, and then just processed the scans to taste in Adobe Lightroom. As far as ISO 1000 goes, the resolution is very high and the grain is relatively fine. Compared to pushing something like XX or Tri-X, it's overall a lot better controlled in the grain department, and compared to HP5, it's a bit more punchy and tonally varied. I haven't thought about doing a comparison to, you know, Delta 3200 or T-Max P3200 shot at 1000 because then there's no or almost no pushing involved, but that might be interesting to see if I can get a few more rolls of this at some stage. Overall, great performance in that regard. On a similar note, the contrast and dynamic range seem pretty good despite pushing it about a stop and a half from its true ISO. I've seen some reviews where people say that dynamic range is quite limited, and admittedly I didn't shoot on a super bright sunny day, but I do have some shots where I was shooting indoors, you know, looking outdoors, and I have a mixture of interior and exterior scenes at the same time, and there's a decent amount of detail in both. And again, given the push, I would say it's actually performing quite well compared to some other films. So far, I keep saying that the film was XYZ rather than is, and that's because it isn't available anymore, and I'm putting it as a pro because I think it's for very damn good reasons. Camera Store and Santa Film have stopped selling this stuff to stop sending money to the Russian regime that are fighting in Ukraine after having invaded. Despite the massive amount of investment it takes to get a project like this going, the fact that they were willing to just cut the project and sell off the remaining stock that they had to donate over 20,000 euros in a week to humanitarian aid is damn good and well worth standing up for, and I think it's extremely admirable. Fujifilm wish they had reasons as good as this for discontinuing everything. When I say that the base is extremely thin, I mean it's extremely thin. It makes the quite thin RAE films, or like Foma Ortho 400, look like cardboard by comparison. It is shockingly thin, and it is very difficult to get onto your reels unless you have extremely clean reels. If your ball bearings aren't moving absolutely flawlessly on a Patterson reel, it's not going to work. I've seen some people get better results with a steel reel, so maybe it's worth investing in like a steel Patterson reel to have for very thin films. I probably will buy one this year. It's just something you do need to bear in mind. It took me about 45 minutes to load this roll of film, and by that point, I had mechanical like crescent marks all over the start of the roll. And fine, those films were damaged anyway, as we'll see in a sec. But it was just extremely difficult to work with, and it's not something that a lot of people are gonna have fun using, you know, if you're able to get your hands on this film. It's something you really do need to be aware of. It's not just, oh, it's a bit thin. It's thin to the point that it's actually a problem. Similarly, the film does have a significant problem with light leaks, and in my case I had this almost like cosmic ray fogging through the leader to the first few frames. Fine, I mentioned that I got 37 frames on this roll. My first frame was frame 0, so I probably just shouldn't have taken that. Other people have had similar issues with this kind of speckled fogging pattern, like Michael Nguyen? I know I'm butchering his name, but he did a review on the JCH website of this film and saw exactly the same thing. It's not just me. And I loaded the film under, you know, subdued light indoors, and it's still fogged. So it's the kind of thing you really want to load and unload in absolute darkness if you can. My third favorite picture from the roll is not for any technical or artistic reason. This plesiosaur that I shot with the 50mm at the Hunterian Museum is a nice overall picture. You know, the composition's pretty good, the bokeh and the background blur are quite nice, but for me it just tickles me that it's got the face and the angle, which I didn't realize when I was shooting it, almost perfectly matches that stupid wheezing meme where the guy is slamming on the table, and it just tickles me every time. My second favorite shot on this roll was also from the Hunterian with the 50, but not for comedy reasons. I actually just like this photograph. This woman was moving back and forth in front of the map of the world, the map of the whole world, which was a gift to a Chinese emperor in the 17th century. And I kind of prefer her in the corner of the frame here. When she was in front, in the middle of the frame, it was maybe a bit more imposing, but she was blocking a bit more of the map, and I wanted to keep the map as the subject rather than her. I think having her just as an anonymous observer works quite well. And in that same kind of vein, I did overexpose a little bit to make sure, because I was pushing, that I didn't lose too much shadow detail in her, and that probably wasn't the right decision. I probably should have kept my exposure down a bit and just get nice even tonal range in the map itself. The film did well, but given the harsh lighting with the lights directly on the map and her not being directly lit and pushing film and being indoors, this is kind of pushing the limits of the dynamic range of the film when shot at 1000. Even so, it didn't blow out or anything, it's just in hindsight I probably should have shot this a little bit darker. By far my favourite picture from the roll, this shot of the Spitfire in the Kelvin Grove Museum, shot with the 20-35 and cropped down to the X-band ratio 65-24. I did crop quite a few of the 20mm shots on this roll to like 16:9, but 65-24 X-band aspect ratio worked so well for this shot. We have a nice range of whites through the blacks with a good range of tones. This is the tonal range that this film, you know, shows off quite well in this shot. Resolution is really good, even though I'm cropping a single 35mm frame. The sharpness is great. And, you know, it's just a very imposing, strong frame. You've got a very dominant central war machine with nice architecture surrounding it, lots of leading lines bleeding towards the center. And just the fact that it's a Spitfire, you know, a World War II fighter plane that has been restored, 2.3 tons hanging from the ceiling, that's just cool. I mean, when I was a little boy, I used to love seeing trains and planes from World War II and olden times, and this kind of thing. It's just cool, man. Normally this is the part of the video where I would ask, who is this film for and would I recommend it? Neither of those things really apply here anymore, because the film is gone, but for a very damn good reason. The film kind of sits on a spectrum between HP5 and Tri-X and XX, where it's got a bit more contrast than HP5, Definitely box, certainly push to 800, but a bit less grain than Tri-X and XX, and a bit more resolution than those films when pushed to a similar-ish speed. I think there's a niche kind of in there that it occupies, and if you have the opportunity to try it, if you can find some and you want to get it, or if you already have it and haven't shot it yet, I think it's worth a shot. I do have one roll left, and I'm probably going to push it to 1600 or 2000 and develop it in X-Tall 1+1, 1+3, because you get a bit more shadow detail with X-Tall, and it lowers the overall contrast a bit. Depends how I try and shoot it, but I think there's a bit more room to play around with it. Given the results I've seen with the fogging and the mechanical difficulties of loading, I think I might as well just like full send it and screw around and see what I can get out of the second roll, try and do something a bit more extreme with it. If I were able to get the film on 120, I would love to get at least one roll so I could do a comparison with HP5, both pushed to 1000, just to see how it comes out. That's all I have to say for this video, so stay safe, and bye bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.